Hello everybody. As you could have probably noticed down to how long it's been since my last video, I decided to take a quick break to enjoy Christmas with my family as I didn't really want to be editing on Boxing Day. But today marks the return of weekly videos, and I'd just like to say a huge thank you for getting me to 700 subscribers. Since we've hit the new year this week, I decided to revisit a topic that many have already touched on in the past. But now seems like as good a time as any to truly talk about it once again. 569 days ago, we were given the first teaser trailer to the sequel of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, perhaps one of the widely regarded best games in the series. I'll stray away from babbling on too long about the game and the finer details of the game's reveal, but it almost wasn't a surprise considering the first game had gained such high praise from critics and fans alike at launch. And man, those days have absolutely flown by. By my count, the last true Nintendo Direct where it seemed like we were gonna see more of the game was a year and 3 months ago now, which is absurd to even think about. But nevertheless, it is the truth. Your brain doesn't deceive you, and it really has been that long. Since last year, it was a conversation that Breath of the Wild could be released in 2020. This year I'd like to talk about whether the game could come out in 2021, or perhaps even 2022, or even longer, and why each release date would be a good and a bad thing. So first of all, let's talk about a positive outcome, or at least a positive outcome on the surface. What if the game releases this year? As I've said, for multiple reasons, this is great. First of all, this would mean that we'd get our first proper look at the game before the middle of the year, and yes, please, come on, we all want to see the game as soon as physically possible. If we could even get a taste of the Breath of the Wild news before March, we could all be positively frothing by the mouth. Not to mention the amount of content to create for creators and to watch for viewers. It would be crazy. Speculation would go through the roof, and that is literally all I could ever want. In fact, as long as I get confirmation of a name soon, I'm more than happy. Next, the game itself. Not a single person watching this video wouldn't love for Breath of the Wild to come out this year. To a lot of us, it's the only year that makes logical sense. This year's the series' 35th anniversary. Along with that, all Zelda games seem to happen within 2 years of each other. For example, since 2011 we've been given Skyward Sword, then we were given A Link Between Worlds in 2013, Triforce Heroes in 2015, Breath of the Wild in 2017, Link's Awakening in 2019. Carrying on the trend could be Breath of the Wild 2 next year. How could the game coming out this year possibly lead to any negative outcomes? To me, there is one glaring reason why it shouldn't come out this year. We do not want the game to be rushed at all. The last few years, there have been more and more games that have succumbed to being a worse game down to developers wanting to just get the product out there, get the money. In my opinion, video games are a form of art. They can portray what a person is feeling. They can show things from the real world and show us how we're doing things wrong. So when a big publisher releases a game, there's this sort of expectation for the game to feel like an experience rather than just something that you play. It's why we've seen more and more people get on the case of Pokemon. The games no longer feel like an experience like they did years ago. Now they almost feel like a slog. And so those games break down to the worst possible thing a game can be imaginable. Straight out rushed. Rushing out games to meet a certain deadline was actually seen extremely recently. I'm sure you've all heard of the terrible launch of Cyberpunk 2077 just this past month on last gen consoles. This is a different scenario entirely, but it still stands. Saying this, I also think that if a Zelda game ever feels rushed, it'll be down to gameplay rather than its general performance, so maybe Cyberpunk isn't the best example, but I still think it gets my point across. Even in the Zelda series, we've seen a game somewhat rushed in the past. I adore the game to absolute pieces, but the beloved Wind Waker was a game that originally had at least 2 more dungeons in development. One of the biggest issues with that game in most people's opinion is the lack of dungeons in it, and we've even had Aonuma apologise for that to an extent in the past. Do I think that Breath of the Wild 2 will have a similar situation to Wind Waker? Well, no, not really. I think that if anything, Breath of the Wild lacked actual dungeons. I have a video coming up soon discussing how I would improve the Divine Beasts, but to me they just didn't do it. So I really think that the next game will have too many dungeons if anything, considering the Zelda team is most likely using the same engine to create the sequel, and it's already been 4 years since the last game's release. If you're interested in whether I think it could come out this year or not, stick around to the end when I conclude. Next, I'd like to talk about whether Breath of the Wild 2 could come out in 2022 or even beyond. First of all, I can already sense that many of you are positively seething at the idea that it could come out after this year. Well, traditionally Zelda has been delayed quite heavily. Even Breath of the Wild was first scheduled for a 2015 release under the title Zelda U. It was then delayed into 2016 and was delayed once again into 2017 in time for the Switch's launch, so this is entirely possible. And the only reason why I'm discussing delays is because many people are acting like the game's already been slated for a 2021 release, even though we haven't seen as much as a real trailer for the game yet. For all we know, the sequel might not be even getting a trailer until next year. Well, why would this be a good thing then? As hard as it could be for some of you to admit, you must admit that the further the game is held back, most likely the better it will be. Going back to Cyberpunk, the gameplay itself is fun, and many people on PC and next gen are enjoying it now, and that is down to them delaying the game to no avail. You all saw it being delayed on Twitter over and over and over again, and while it didn't pay off in this case, that's not with the cost of good gameplay. It's simple. A game in development for longer is a way more enjoyable game. Skyward Sword released in 2011. The gap between this and Breath of the Wild was 6 whole years, one of the largest gaps between 3D entries in the series, though that made a lot more sense down to a new engine. But even though the game took what felt like a lifetime to create, they still came out with a pristine product that we all love playing to this day, especially most people that watch my channel, I presume. All of that time away and all the hype generated wasn't for nothing. And I think that delaying a game can only be seen as a good thing in this day and age. The negatives of bringing this game out next year do not back down from a fight though. First of all, let's talk about the dying of hype. Most Zelda games are made on an entirely different gameplay engine to the previous one, so the 5 to 6 year wait makes a lot of sense most of the time. Creating all new assets and everything should take a long time, it's understandable, but a game made of the exact same engine? Well, the hype for this kind of game would all but die out if we don't have any information by the end of the year. As I said earlier on, even a name of the game would revitalise some of that hype. Even in the past year, we've seen that people are getting more and more tired of waiting for more news on the game. The tweets joking about if the game is still real have started coming out in full force, and that will only get worse with time. Believe me when I say that it will be extremely difficult to lead on from the standard set by Breath of the Wild to the next game. But many people agree that only minor changes such as traditional dungeons and more combat related dungeons would improve the overall experience and could make this the best Zelda games hands down. There is potential in the next game that I haven't seen in the likes of any game I've ever been excited for. The next negative for having the game come out next year or beyond is something that links back to my previous point and something that may relate to people watching this video more than anything. Zelda creators are a creative bunch. For as far as the eye can see, there are different types of videos. Hell, Nehru made an entire video talking about Dungeons and Dragons in Zelda form. There is a plethora of Zelda content around every single corner you look. But I don't know about you, but the Theory Pot and Breath of the Wild 2 Pot are getting extraordinarily thin on the bigger channels that have been doing this longer than me. I only have respect for them, but some of the larger channels have been uploading less and less more recently, and I don't blame them one bit. It's hard thinking of video ideas for the next game without as much as 2 minutes of solid footage for the sequel. This means less videos will be made about the game. In turn, this will mean that the hype for the game will die off for many other people. As I've said many times in the past, it's a small detail that may not harm consumers too much, but I have to cover my bases, and it may apply to my viewers more than most people, so I thought I'd keep you informed. Well, in conclusion, when do I think the game will come out? At the moment, I still believe the game will come out this year. It goes without saying that the events of the past year have affected the game development world to no end. Nintendo have said as much in their partner showcases, but until the month hits August, I will still say that the game has a chance of coming out, considering I think it could be a holiday title in November. The opportunity seems too grand, and I think we'll get Skyward Sword HD too, but perhaps that's a topic for another video. Well, what do you think? Do you think that the game will come out this year, or do you think it will come out next year, or perhaps even beyond? Place your thoughts down in the comments and I'll make sure to reply where I can. If you enjoyed and you're excited for Breath of the Wild 2, then please like this video and subscribe, as I'd love to hit 750 subscribers soon. Giant thanks to all the people on screen, and an extra special thanks to long-term Patreon SumG for becoming the hero to my Princess Zelda and becoming the highest paying Patreon he possibly can be. Thank you so much. Check out the link to my Patreon in the description, and please do pledge some money if you can and of course want to. Along with that link, there's also my other social medias, so if you want to keep up to date with me, then check there. For the final time, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week. We're back, baby!